kitchen. My name is Sarah. I'm not a sourdough expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to say that somehow I fell into it, and now I'm really hyper addicted to making sourdough. Today I want to share with you how to make a really very new recipe for me. As I said, I'm not an expert, but I did go out and buy this book, the Larousse book for bread, and I've been really dying to make the green tea and orange loaf. Fingers crossed mine will look the same. So fortunately I live in South Melbourne, which is very close to a very brilliant market. I think it's the nicest market in Melbourne, the South Melbourne market. So I went to Rita's Nut Shop and I managed to find myself some orange blossom water, which is also added to the loaf alongside the matcha powder. So I basically put all my ingredients to the side. I'm ready to go, and I'm just going to talk you through what this loaf contains, and I'll show you what the dough looks like once it's mixed through in the KitchenAid. So it has quite a lot of candied orange rind. They told me I needed to chop it finely, but I think it will suffice. In the picture it kind of looked like that consistency. So I'm basically also checking my recipe, but I need to essentially just mix together first just the flour, the water, the starter and my yeast. Now I read somewhere that when you add salt to the dough, I've got a little bit of salt in here, and I'm putting in just 2 teaspoons of salt to a total of 4 cups of plain flour. So popping the salt in now. Now this sourdough recipe doesn't stay in the fridge overnight, so it does need the addition of some regular yeast. The recipe calls for fresh yeast, which is something I just simply can't get my hands on. So if anyone knows how to get that, I would love to know. In the event that you don't have fresh yeast available, I've read that you just use half of regular dry yeast. So I need to put in here 1/4 teaspoon of dry yeast. I've read it's important that you don't get the salt near the yeast, so just try and keep it to the side or keep it separate. Some recipes actually ask you to mix it at a different point in time. Now in here I've got some sourdough starter that I fed this morning. I pulled the starter batch out of my fridge and fed it and have left it on the bench until it looks bubbly. Now the bakers might think it's not perfect, but to me this is the kind of consistency that my starter resembles before it's ready to add for a bake. So I'm just going to add that into my big bowl of flour with yeast and salt. So just scoop that in now. I can't begin to say, making bread somehow makes me feel incredibly excited because you never quite know how the loaf will look. There's always that element of suspense, or even how it will smell, and I think today's loaf is going to be beautiful. So I've popped that in, and then the final thing I just need to add to that is a bit of water. So I'll just get ready with my cup of water. It should be basically around 20 degrees Celsius, but I never check the temperature. I just sort of make it not too hot, not too cold. I'm sure it's probably really important to test it, but I can't be bothered getting my thermometer out of the cupboard. So here I've got 1 cup of water that I'm just adding to the mix. Now, for months, I used to knead my dough with my own hands until I finally decided, after nearly a year of making bread and getting sore wrists, it was really worthwhile getting a KitchenAid, which I purchased, and now I'm just going to quickly throw it in that. Okay, so the KitchenAid comes with a really sturdy, resilient dough hook. I've been using it for a few months and I've had no problems except for the first day that I used it. We got home from the shop and there was something wrong with how the top of the blender was screwed in, and basically it threw the stainless steel bowl off my bench and nearly killed my Yorkshire Terrier. So that was very stressful. But if you've got problems with your KitchenAid, there's some really helpful YouTube videos about how to fasten this part of the KitchenAid so that the bowl is lining up and things like that. And what I'll do is I'll try and find the link and place it underneath the video. So I'm just quickly putting the bowl in. As you can see, I really am not an expert. It always takes me a bit of time. I'm still getting used to it. So there it is, it's in. Now recipes often say that when you mix the dough, you start at a light speed. However, with this one, if you need to increase it, it's not really advisable, I don't think, to put the KitchenAid on a really high speed because it will probably overheat I forgot one thing. I'm glad that happened. I always kind of mix the flour in a little bit with the chopstick. It just tends to be easier to mix through. It also stops a massive kind of flour blizzard. Okay, so I've just mixed that around and I've got my trusty dough scraper. If you don't have one of these, this is an essential, especially if you're doing everything by hand. You know when you have to sort of scrape the bench down because flour is stuck, you either break your fingernails or scratch it with a knife or something. So get yourself one of these. It's really cheap, just from a local cookware store. It's called a dough scraper. And I'm just going to use that just to scrape down the bowl a little bit. So, I think I'm ready. Good, so it's going to make a little bit of noise. This now needs to just mix for 5 minutes. And I'm just going to mix it on one. Alright, so it's been mixing for 5 minutes, and this is a little unusual for me because I don't normally have to add olive oil to any of the recipes I've used so far, but apparently I meant to use 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So I'm just going to pop that in now. And then it needs to mix for another 2 minutes. At the moment the loaf hasn't really fully formed into a ball yet, so I'm hoping that the olive oil will do the job. I'll just quickly show it to you in case you want to have a go at this loaf and you feel like your dough looks a little bit like a albino poo. I'll throw it in now, and let's just hope that olive oil does its magic. I mean, I'm a big believer of olive oil. We go through a lot in this household and it is magic, isn't it? I think it's the elixir of life, to be honest. Okay, just checking, and off we go. So that goes for another 2 minutes. Okay, so the dough did improve with the olive oil. It's still looking, I don't know, perhaps a little bit coagulated. You can see the olive oil has sort of assisted in binding everything together. So now for the really exciting bit. This is what I've been dying to do. I just want to experience green dough. I don't know, I love green. I'm a bit of an emerald girl. So I've been dying to make a dough and putting in some green powder to see what we get. So it just needs to have 2 teaspoons of, actually I might use a level just to make sure it's not too bitter or anything. 2 teaspoons of green tea powder, I added. Okay, so that's in. Next up is the orange blossom water. It smells like linen or something. I need to add 5 teaspoons to the dough alongside the matcha. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then that needs to mix together for a couple of minutes. Looking quite slushy and very green. How exciting! So a lot about bread I've discovered in the last 11.5 months is going by feel, and that to me feels like it's a little bit moist, so I'm going to keep mixing it. I might add a little more flour. See what that does. So we're getting quite a hefty dough. That's quite robust for my little machine. It's been kneading for quite a few minutes. It's managed to form itself into 2 separate pieces. So I'll just do a little bit of a hand knead on the silicone mat. It's definitely become a consistent green. So just kneading it fairly firmly actually. It does feel quite a lot firmer than other doughs that I've made from the same cookbook. So I'm trying not to add too much flour because it is a little on the dry side. Just trying to get it into a nice ball, just turning it over on itself before I add in the orange rind. Okay, so there's my ball of green dough. Okie dokie, back to the dough. I'm going to put the orange rind in, and that just needs to knead together on a low speed for probably a good 5 minutes, I'm suspecting. The recipe actually doesn't instruct me for how long I should pop it in for. Oh. So I'll let that do what it needs to do. Hopefully this dough is going to be alright. After worrying that the dough would be no good, I'm actually really wrapped with how it's gone after just giving it the time it needed in the KitchenAid. It's actually become quite moist, which is always good. My mum's always said that when you do dough, according to any recipe, always add a little less flour than what the recipe calls for. I didn't do that for this, and that's why I was getting a bit worried, but it's really nice. So I've taken my wedding rings off, otherwise really messes them up. So just keep your rings off when you're kneading flour or cookie dough or whatever. And I'm just putting it into a nice gentle ball, and I'll show you this now. So that's what the dough looks like. It's quite springy. One way you can know if your dough is ready, I've read, is if you can just really gently stretch it out with your fingers, make it like a little see-through piece of glass. When the light comes through it, I can see through it without it easily tearing. So that's really quite thin here, and I know the dough is ready. Such a good trick. I read that in the Burke Street Bakery cookbook from Burke Street Bakery in Sydney. Now, this recipe in particular, it calls for, this recipe in particular, the book tends to ask that you leave the dough out on the bench, just under a damp towel. So it needs to sit there now for 2 hours. I've just got a wet tea towel and I'm just covering it with that. I'll let it rest for 2 hours and then we'll check in on it. I've been really patient and I've waited for 2 hours. So this is the dough here. It's risen quite a lot. Could have probably risen a little bit more. Just put a little bit of flour on my fingers. Now, the recipe asked me to shape it into 4 separate balls. But I think I'm going to, I'm not sure what I'll do with it. Maybe I'll do what they tell me to do. The recipe requests that you shape the dough then into 4 equal sized balls. So I'll just slice it with the dough scraper into 4. So I've got 4 portions. While you do that, while you shape each ball, it's probably good to just cover the other 3 with a cloth just to keep it moist. Here's my dough portion. It's looking nice. And now I'm just going to knead it gently into a little ball. Just very gently. And then it's got to rest for another 15 minutes or so. And lucky last. So yeah, make sure the cloth is still damp. This one is. I think they're going to puff up a little bit more and they should make nice little small sized buns. It should be good to see when they're done. So 15 minutes under the damp cloth, again in a warmish room. So the dough's been on the bench for 15 minutes. The balls have risen a little bit. Now I just have to flatten them quite gently and roll them between my hands, pressing them gently on the work surface until they're smooth and well rounded. And then place them on very quickly actually so they don't get too dry. Place them on a baking tray lined with baking paper. I'm just smoothing around the edges a little bit as well. I like things to look nice, not rustic. But I have a suspicion these ones are going to be a bit rustic and lumpy. Okay, there's another one. They fit nicely actually on my A3 size tray. I'm allowed to call that that. One of them's a little bit bigger than the others, I think. Maybe it puffed up better. It was closer to the reverse cycle heating. There they are. So, yeah, they almost look a bit like Japanese pancakes, don't they? And now I need to just cover them again with the damp floury tea towel and sit them there for another hour in a warm room. But what I tend to do is I find that it's much better just to pop them on top of the oven, which is already preheating. The thing about bread is that it can be a whole day affair, so it's got to 8 p.m. I'm ready to score the loaves. Cut needs to be fast and deep, and I'm using a double-edged razor blade, which my husband has kindly made for me. And I might cross-hatch this one. The recipe actually says cross-hatch them, but I always think that cross-hatched bread looks really ugly. So I'm just doing crosses and then this one cross-hatch like the recipe told me. That's it. So this is just joined to a bottle opener with super glue. It was done 5 minutes ago. Normally we've held the razor blade with our fingers, but that's not really safe. Before you add the bread to the oven, they say this is the secret of a good crust. You need to put in 1/4 cup of water into the base of the oven. You can just put a baking tray there. So quickly slash the oven in, watch out, it's really hot. It's on 240 degrees. And then very rapidly pop your loaves in, and they just need to go at the base of the oven. It's always hot and stressful for 18 minutes. I'll be getting them out in a tick. I have my mitts, I'm getting them out. Wow, I wish you were here to smell the smell of these loaves. The orange has just filled the entire kitchen. It smells like perfume in here. So I'll just quickly check that they're okay on the base. Yep, they sound hollow. I'm just tearing them out now onto the tray. Ouch, probably should use tongs for this. There we go. They're an off green colour, but they do look quite puffy and fluffy. Now for the best thing ever, and that is to see what they're like on the inside. Get the knife ready. I'm just going to cut a little bit off this one. It's quite crunchy crust. Oh, it's very hot, but hey, this is the best time to crack into bread. So that's the crumb. Looks a little bit cakey, but it's still really, really hot. I'm just going to put a little bit of butter on this. A little bit. Oh, that's naughty. There we go. And now I'm going to try it. It's actually surprisingly really sweet, although it has no sugar other than the candied orange. And you know, what's wrong with freshly baked bread? Nothing. I'll post the recipe for these delicious morsels on my Facebook account, The Bread Science. Otherwise, make sure you follow me on Instagram and also on Facebook if you're a bread lover like myself. Ciao!